So the garden is planted. Now what? Harvest is largely determined about what happens next. Here are the 5 things I'm doing right now in order to get the largest harvest possible. A high priority for me in this in-between window is getting my soil mulched. My soil is very clay-like and heavy, and when it dries out, it becomes a solid rock that nothing wants to grow in. Mulch is the solution to this because it'll create a buffer between the soil and the sunlight, stopping that top layer from drying out every time the sun hits it. It doesn't matter how much I water, that top layer of soil will always dry out if it's exposed to the sun without a good layer of mulch. The other benefit of mulch is even moisture control. My soil is like a double-edged sword. When it dries out, it becomes a rock, but if I keep it super moist, everything will drown because it holds on to water so well, deep within the soil. The mulch will help keep everything so much more even, reducing my need to water. It'll also help with weed control. Because these beds are new this year, I flipped a bunch of soil around and exposed a bunch of weed seeds to the sunlight. So I'm dealing with way more weeds this spring than I've done in the past. I really don't want to spend more time weeding than I need to. The mulch will make it harder for the weed seeds to germinate and hopefully reduce my need for much weeding. And the reason I care if the beds are weed-free or not is because I already plant my plants fairly densely. They're kind of competing with each other as it is. I don't need weeds to be in the mix, increasing the competition further. I want the crops I actually planted to get all the nutrients that's in those beds. I don't want to be feeding weeds. Ideally, I need to add some more organic matter to help break up this clay soil, but everything's planted out, so that won't be happening until it's time to replant. The mulch, however, will break down a little bit over time and add some of that organic matter into the soil that it desperately needs. The mulch I decided to use is a wooden mulch called Ontario Mix, and it's mostly made out of pine. I chose pine over a cedar mulch because while they're both dyed free, this pine wood will break down faster, giving me that organic matter that I'm looking for. And my soil is so alkaline that I can use any little bit of acidity I can put in it. An important step you don't want to miss when you're laying down your mulch is watering it in. Watering the mulch does a few things. It helps wash some of that already broken down matter down to the soil level. Watering it in helps boost that decomposition process. And you want to lock in the moisture retaining of that mulch. So you want to make sure that it's well watered in to begin with. Once I've protected the soil and locked in the moisture, it's time to focus to make sure that the plants have the nutrition they need to grow. At this point in the season, most of the plants are starting to settle in and they're really starting to put on their fast growth. Earlier this spring, I did a soil test and I know that my soil is very low in nitrogen and very low in phosphorus. So in order to get good, strong plant growth, I know I'm going to have to supplement. While I added some fertilizer at planting time, they will need a boost of fertilizer to keep up the strong growth without getting stunted. I'm doing this using a liquid fertilizer. My liquid fertilizer of choice is the ProMix all-purpose fertilizer. I like a liquid fertilizer versus a granular fertilizer for regular feedings because it is immediately available to the plants. Liquid fertilizer doesn't need to be broken down by the soil life in order for the plants to be able to use it. Some crops benefit more from regular feeding than others. The crops I'm paying close attention to are my broccoli, my onions, and my squash plants in particular. Those are my heavy feeders. This is also when I've added a layer of compost around all my squashes to act like a slow release fertilizer between my liquid feedings. I have struggled with squash nutrition in past seasons, so I'm babying them a little here to make sure that they have everything they need. Of course, feeding the plants only matter if they are still there to harvest from, so this is also the time that I am watching out for my common pests. I have been dealing with an ant apocalypse over here this season. They are chewing right through the stems of a lot of my brassicas. So far, I have lost 2 cabbage plants and 6 broccoli plants to their damage. I'm looking at the bases of my brassicas on the regular right now and spraying off any of the nibbling ants with insecticidal soap to try and just knock back their numbers. I have also made up a bait using sugar, borax, and a little bit of water to try to eliminate the colonies. At one point, I think I had an ant colony in every single one of my raised beds. I'm also proactively spraying my brassicas with BT to help manage the cabbage moth. I think over the years I've done a good job at managing their population and not letting them run rampant through my garden, that I've seen a few of the moths, but not a ton. The allium leaf miner has also shown evidence that it's here. I've been actively spraying the onions down with BT as well to try to mitigate any damage that the little larva could create to the onions. This is still a little bit of an experiment to see if it will work, so fingers crossed for the onions. Most of the directly seeded crops have germinated now, and it's time to go back and thin them to ensure that there's proper spacing and that things aren't competing for nutrients. I like to sow extra seeds when direct seeding to make sure I at least have one plant where I want it, so going back and thinning is necessary. I had to seed in my arugula between my onions pretty heavily, and I've had better germination than I expected. In many spots, 3 or 4 seedlings germinated where I only have space for one plant. I have found that they're growing pretty slowly, so reducing the competition down to 1 seedling per spot I think will help speed up their growth. In my other onion patch, I have radishes seeded between all the onions. In many cases, both of the 2 radish seeds that I seeded have germinated, so I need to thin down to 1 in order to get good root development on the radishes, as well as allow enough room for the onions to form. The carrot bed has also germinated, but true to carrot fashion, the germination has been a little iffy. So some spots are very seedling heavy and need to be thinned out in order to get good carrot development, and then other spots have no seedlings at all. I'm going to reseed some carrots where the germination was spotty. This time I'm going to add a little bit of compost in those areas to help lock in that moisture and see if I can improve germination in those areas. Speaking of reseeding, it is time to look around and pull anything that is not doing well or that didn't germinate and reseed. For most of us, we're going to have lots of time still left in the seasons, even in the colder areas. Your season's just getting going. If things aren't working now, it's time to just pull the plug, take them out, and reseed. For me, this is some cabbages that those ants ate. They aren't going to recover. So I'm reseeding with some zucchini. There is zero reason to leave these sad cabbages in those spots. They're never going to recover, and even if they did, their head would be subpar, when I still have lots of time in my growing season to get another crop in there. Once everything is thinned and I have replanted the crops that need to be replanted, it's time to make sure that everything's growing where it's supposed to be growing. My tomatoes had a rough time as seedlings because they waited a little bit longer to go out with the cold weather and they weren't happy. So I had some very thin yellowing leaves. Now that I have all this fresh dark green growth, it's time to get rid of those tattered leaves because they aren't doing anything for the plant. I'm also on the lookout for suckers. I like to try to get the suckers when they're nice and small and easy to pinch out, and I don't need to go get a pair of pruners. Another way I like to prune and harvest at the same time is with lettuce. I like to pick the outer leaves of the plant first, the ones closest to the ground, when I harvest. This prunes off the oldest leaves, keeping the plant off the soil, away from the bugs and the dirt, and it keeps the fresh growth going. I'm also making sure that any crop that's supposed to be growing on a trellis is actually making its way to the trellis. That means training the tomatoes with the tomato clips and pinning them to my trellis, or making sure that the peas and the beans are grabbing their trellises and not the plants around them. While most of my attention has been making sure the crops that are planted are growing well, it's also time to start thinking about what will happen when I harvest all these crops out. Some of these beds in about a month or so will be empty because the crop that I have planted in there will be done. If I wait to make my plan then, I will have missed the window for some seed starting. For example, I have this large bed of broccoli that will be ready for harvest in early July. That leaves me July, August, September, and some of October left in my growing season. That's about 3 more months of growing time before our first frost. I have plans for broccolini, sweet peppers, bush, winter squash, and green beans to go in that bed after the broccoli's removed. It's time to start thinking about when I want to get a head start and pre-sprout some seeds. I will probably pre-sprout my green seeds indoors so that they can get up and growing really quickly. Same thing with my squash. I'll also start my broccolini seedlings about 4 weeks before I plan for them to hit the garden, which is now at the beginning of June. My spring planting of lettuce will also be done in July, and it will be time to replant with something that's a little bit more heat tolerant. The variety of lettuce that I'm using as my heat tolerant lettuce is called Drunken Woman. And I want to go in with seedlings instead of starting from seed. Now in early June is when I need to start that second succession of lettuce. None of these tasks are particularly complicated, but together they turn a garden from just surviving to one that is actually producing. If I stay on top of the moisture, feeding, pest, pruning, and succession planting, I'll give myself the best chance of harvesting 650 pounds of food this season.